The story begins. People work diligently in the fields, and it is clear that the workers are very tired. They have carried out various tasks, such as fetching water and placing hay inside it. Despite their great effort to complete their duties, someone in the background kept pressuring them to work faster. This particular overseer was a small goblin who seemed to enjoy his job, sitting on his favorite slave. This same slave could no longer endure it, as he was constantly whipped. The strongest man in the world, the one who had earned the title at 27 years old and maintained the position as the best fighter in the world for the last few years as the heavyweight champion in the largest MMA league, was named Choi Yu-kan, a man who, even in his last defensive fight before retirement, had never suffered a single defeat. Once again, he defeated his opponent, becoming the champion of South Korea. But Kanan could not believe that he would die because he was hit by a truck. He felt sad because the money Yu-kan had been saving for his retirement vanished out of nowhere. Yu-kan was devastated, as he had worked so hard until that moment. Choi Yu-kan died alone, fighting until his last breath, but 30 minutes later, he found himself in an unfamiliar space. He thought this might be better since now that he was dead, he no longer needed to train or participate in defensive fights. His only salvation was the fact that he had no family or friends, meaning no one would be sad about his death. Suddenly, something very beautiful began to shine in front of him, and soon, a girl's hand appeared, apologizing for being late to meet the S-rank hero, Choi Yu-kan. She was a girl with golden hair, wearing a white dress and angel wings. She introduced herself playfully as Rachel, a recruiter looking for people whose lives on Earth had ended. Looking at her imposing figure, which made him blush, Yu-kan assumed that this girl was an explorer. He turned to the angel, holding her hands, and asked Rachel to tell him more about everything. The girl sweetly smiled, saying that Yu-kan had two options. The first was to accept death as it was, and wait for his reincarnation in the next life as a miserable bachelor. The second was to resurrect immediately as a hero to save the world that awaited him. Rachel showed the young man what could be waiting for him in the future: beautiful girls, wealth, and the status of an SSS rank hero. But it was all too sudden for Yu-kan, so he asked for some time to think about it, feeling that the girl's explanation was a bit too vague to make a decision. Rachel approached the young man and asked if he was really considering missing this unique opportunity. She told him that he would have wealth, honor, and beautiful women, as well as special privileges for those who became heroes. But Yu-kan thought he would have to fight anyway if he became a hero. He stepped back and, while saying he would have to fight again, told Rachel he would prefer to die and reincarnate in peace. The girl, on the other hand, was not happy about this. She asked the young man to pay attention since the newly formed hero didn't understand anything. She explained everything to him properly. The girl began to seduce him with kind words, saying that if Yu-kan became a warrior in another world, the village chief would run to him barefoot and serve him food as soon as he started. Yu-kan would look kindly at the chief and fulfill the easy tasks given to him. At that moment, the chief would touch the hero and say, "Hero, my daughter is known as the most beautiful woman in this village. If you could kindly accept my humble daughter, this old villager would have nothing more to ask for." Watching this theatrical piece, Yu-kan thought it was nonsense and that he didn't need any of it. Rachel also noticed that he wasn't interested, and with that, her bonus would be wasted. In this case, she had no choice but to use Plan B. That's when the angel decided to leave, assuming the hero didn't care about the opportunity. She asked Yu-kan to accept the fact that his life was over as an old bachelor. Suddenly, something struck Yu-kan, and he asked the girl to wait a moment. She looked at him with an arrogant or condescending tone and warned that there was no guarantee he would reincarnate as a human in the next life. This shocked the young man, who grabbed the girl's leg, begging her to stop as he had decided to do it. Rachel pretended not to hear anything, and Yu-kan began shouting with tears in his eyes that he would accept and become the hero. The girl was very pleased as her plan had worked and decided to proceed. Suddenly, a magical circle appeared at the young man's feet. To his surprise, at that moment, Yu-kan shouted. Rachel slid her finger around the magic circle and said they had no time as a beautiful world awaited him. Yu-kan was not happy. He shouted that you couldn't just send someone to another world without preparation, but the girl didn't care. She had already done her job. She didn't understand why Yu-kan hesitated so much when he already knew he was going there. At that moment, the girl's phone rang. She answered the call and informed that the potential hero, number Degree 17,421 Choi Yu-kan, had just completed his relocation. Yu-kan found himself lying on a wooden bed and heard a strange voice calling him. He thought it was the village chief the angel had mentioned. It seemed to him that the unfolding of events was obvious from the beginning, but suddenly, Yu-kan was punched in the stomach, hearing the words, "I'll rip out your eyes if you don't wake up." Yukon jumped out of bed, thinking he was being attacked by a crazy person who wanted to die quickly, but upon closer inspection, he saw a red-skinned man with a bull's head in front of him. This red-skinned man didn't understand who Yukon was to be sleeping in the slave's dormitory. The young man was confused. Was this really the village chief who had the most beautiful daughter? Yukon hoped it was a monster he was supposed to kill. Humbly, he knelt and explained that he was a hero, but the man didn't understand. Heroes in those days were so stupid, and Yukon didn't know what was happening or what had gone wrong. He couldn't believe that such a beautiful angel would do this to him. In this case, he thought that the bull-headed man was his learning mission. He decided to stay calm because if he was right, the next thing to do as a Korean was, yes, as a Korean he should act, which meant he should hit that bull with all his strength so that it would be left as mere cow dung. Everything seemed to go according to Yukon's plan, but seeing that the red-skinned man was unharmed and still holding his leg, Yukon thought it was over. The bull-headed one decided to strike with his fist, thinking that this way, the damned fool would regain his senses if he slept it off well. Sometime later, in the underground prison, the Khan demanded that the door be opened for him. He ordered that the bull-headed one be brought back so he could fight again. A small goblin with a sword on its back approached the commotion. Extremely dissatisfied with the fact that this annoying man was causing such a racket, the goblin warned that if he shouted again, it would make soup out of Yukon. Frightened by the sword, Yukon promised to stay quiet. The goblin warned once more that it was watching him, and Yukon understood every word it said. Soon, Yukon was sitting on the ground, reflecting on this so-called great adventure in another world. Scratching his head, he couldn't understand where things had gone wrong. At this rate, not to mention the chief's daughter, Khan would die a virgin for the second time. He heard a voice claiming to be his senior, someone who would become a hero. The man explained that they were in the Demon King's army's fortress, where people were enslaved. Incidentally, the man was Korean, and it seemed Yukon wasn't the only one summoned to this world. Anyway, Yukon asked him to explain what was going on and why they had ended up there. The man smiled and asked if Yukon really wanted to know everything. Then he shouted loudly, "Hey, self-proclaimed heroes! Are you still alive? The real hero who came to save us is already here." At this point, voices from the cells could be heard, pleading to be rescued, with some claiming he was the true hero to be saved. Khan didn't understand what kind of joke this was, but the man explained that 100 heroes had fallen into the Demon King's army's fortress. The bull-headed one Yukon was searching for was the leader of this place, Hodder, and the guard Yukon had seen earlier was named Jar, known for his cruelty. The man warned the boy to be careful. He also mentioned they were in this miserable place because of an evil demon named Rachel. Yukon's eyes widened at that moment, and the man blamed the damn demon for bringing them all there. Yukon didn't understand how Rachel had sent them to the wrong place. They were supposed to appear in a completely different location. The man insisted he was sure of it. Captured heroes in other places had told him that, according to them, there was another initial area reserved solely for heroes. Most heroes started in cities or rural villages, leading normal lives without abilities. Yukon seemed to have already lost his mind. He finally realized that the reason he had fallen there was because of that angel. Back to the original point, the slaves worked hard while goblins mistreated them, and Yukon was treated like a horse. Soon, the work ended, and the goblin ordered all the slaves to return. At this moment, Yukon thought about how one day he would finish off that small, fat goblin. The shift ended, and Yukon was already lying in his cell, thinking it was a much better place than outside. Suddenly, Yukon remembered the angel's words that he would have special privileges. It seemed the girl had said he would have them immediately if he decided to become a hero. So Yukon decided to try. He extended his hand in front of him, saying the popular slogan used everywhere, "Status window." A status window appeared before him. He was at level 1 with the role of a slave. Strength 28, Dexterity 29, Stamina 31, Mana 10, and the pickaxe skill ranked D, but he had 0 bonus points. Jan was surprised that his stamina was 31. The man behind the wall was also surprised to see that Yukon's stamina was 31, while his own was 28. The man remembered Yukon talking about how he had once been a champion. As expected, Yukon was different, as he already had 30 stats even at level 1. But this didn't matter to Yukon, as he was still a slave. The man disagreed, saying that with these characteristics, Yukon could surely get out of there and become a hero, but Yukon was tired of hearing this nonsense. The man continued, saying that normal people only received the pickaxe skill, but Yukon's case was very rare. Still, Yukon was really tired of hearing all this, so he wished his comrade behind the wall good night as he fell asleep. Even if it were true, he was still level 1, so he couldn't escape. When the man finally fell asleep, Ikin decided to open the status window once again. Upon looking, he saw that some attributes seemed promising. Mana, which granted strength over mana, and those mysterious hero points. Ikin had already asked the man about these points before, but no one knew what they were. Suddenly, a familiar bright light appeared before Yukon's eyes, and soon the girl's chest appeared, which, of course, startled the young man. The girl greeted the hero, saying it had been a while since they last met. Rachel flew up to the hero with a smile and said, "Should I explain about hero points?" She began talking about how hero points are an important resource that makes the hero's life easier. They can be earned by completing missions and used afterward. Yukan ignored her words and grabbed the girl with his enormous hands, squeezing her so hard that the sound of bones breaking could be heard. Ikin just needed to give this idiot a good beating. After some time, Rachel was apologizing for what she had done, saying she never imagined her magical circles would be destroyed because she spilled coffee on them while snacking. Yan realized that as punishment, Rachel had now become his manager. The girl explained that, more precisely, she had become his personal fairy. She would have to stay by his side and help him until Yukan defeated the Demon King. But Yukan wasn't interested in hero matters, which of course surprised Rachel. Yukan went to bed, saying he wouldn't defeat the Demon King but would simply live a normal life there. Rachel explained that there are many potential heroes who choose to live quietly and peacefully. However, Yukan had SS-level potential. Nonetheless, Yukan decided that this didn't mean he was obligated to do anything, as he didn't feel it was his mission. The girl was confused, thinking he was an idiot who only knew about fights and women, and wondered what had changed recently. Rachel was bowing to her superiors, trying to understand why she had to be Yukan's personal fairy. Rachel thought she might have been mistaken about something, but turning someone with her experience into a personal fairy was too much. The leadership was firm in their decision. They wanted her to stay with him until the Demon King was defeated. For Rachel, being a personal fairy was like being a subordinate to the designated warrior. She was required to actively cooperate and share in the successes and failures of the designated warrior. The management decided to send Rachel to the Demon Fortress, where Shoy and Yukan were now, and ordered her not to return until the mission was completed. The girl was extremely dissatisfied and begged with tears for them not to force her into this, as she didn't want to be thrown into the dirty human world. The young man said that in any case, she, as his personal fairy, must obey every word of her warrior. Therefore, Rachel would have to contribute to his escape plan. Rachel had no choice but to agree to the young man's terms. When there was a knock at the door, Yukan quickly grabbed the girl and began hiding her. The goblins ordered the slaves to wake up. Rachel resented Yukan for grabbing her since she could use invisibility magic herself. Yukan, unaware of what was happening, was confused about why they had come. The goblin jar ordered him to get up, as he was being summoned by Rodrum. Upon arriving at Rodrum's office, the demon approached Yukan, saying he had heard he had been working hard recently. Jar had apparently told Rodrum that Yukan had a pleasant new attitude. Yukan was shocked. Had that stinking goblin really praised him? Initially, Rodrum thought Yukan was a crazy person, but was pleased to see him working so diligently. Therefore, he proposed making Yukan the head of the slaves. Rachel was fearful Yukan might accept, hoping he would reject the proposal immediately. She couldn't understand how a hero could humiliate himself before the Demon King's officers. Suddenly, Jar and Hran heard a strange sound. It was Yukan, banging his head on the table, signaling his agreement with the proposal. This, of course, pleased Rodrum greatly. Yukan promised to do his best to make the slaves work efficiently, which made Rodrum extremely satisfied. Unlike his initial impression, he now liked Yukan, and even promised to write a special recommendation letter for him to join the Demon King's army if he did a good job. Rachel was in disbelief, cursing her fate, as this meant Yukan's escape plan was now a failure. A few days later, the slaves were whipped harder and ordered to speed up their work pace under the supervision of their new overseer, Yukan. He insulted the slaves, claiming they were weaker than his grandmother. Despite his harsh treatment, the system reported that Yukan's charisma had increased due to his leadership over so many people. This delighted Yukan, who considered being the head of slaves the best thing ever, though the other slaves didn't share his enthusiasm. They thought he had gone mad, as he was supposed to be a hero, but now acted as their enemy. Rachel also thought he was insane, concerned they would face serious problems if he continued like this. Smiling, Yukan told Rachel to trust the process, likening her to a sparrow incapable of understanding a phoenix's true intentions. Suddenly, one of the slaves collapsed, and Yukan berated him, accusing him of skipping lunch and crawling like a worm. At that moment, the system informed him that Hran's favor toward him had increased. Yukan was now a few steps closer to achieving his goal. Looking at the tower, he thanked Rodrum for the opportunity, saying he had served faithfully. Rachel scolded the hero again, accusing him of using the situation as an excuse for adventure and escape. She couldn't understand how this could be considered either. Yukon explained that the system had instructed him to do so, and asked Rachel if following the system wasn't part of a hero's duty. Despite his reasoning, Rachel remained opposed, considering it ridiculous that gaining favor with Demon King army officers was a hero's mission. Yukon then read the mission aloud. You find yourself in the Demon King's army fortress due to the error of an idiot. Hearing this, Rachel realized it was a lie because the tone was off. The system was supposed to use neutral language, and Yukon seemed tired of explaining. He suggested that perhaps SSS-level heroes had slightly different systems. Rachel still couldn't grasp what was happening. In summary, Rachel couldn't understand why Yukon had been so happy to accept the proposal the previous night, calling him crazy. Yukon grabbed her and blamed her for being in that place. Then the system notified Yukon of the hero's task. Since Yukon was in the Demon King's army fortress due to an idiot's mistake, he could feel guilty as someone who realizes they've run out of toilet paper. The system urged him not to despair. Fortunately, Yukon had a chance to gain favor with Rodrom, an officer of the Demon King's army. The reward was 100 hero points. Hearing this, Yukon devised his plan. Returning to the present, he ordered the slaves to sing the Demon King's third army song. Rachel couldn't believe this nonsense. Was this truly his mission? She began to suspect only superiors could alter mission content. Why would they do this for Yukon? Jar interrupted Yukon, calling him to Rodrum's office. There, Rodrum praised the increased productivity among the slaves, and Yukon humbly credited Rodrum's wise leadership. Rachel was mortified by his cheap flattery, but was shocked when the system confirmed Yukon had completed his task. Rodrum was overjoyed, and Yukon received 100 hero points, unlocking access to the beginner hero shop. Rachel and Yukon were both stunned that it worked. With the favor mission complete, it was time to move to the next part of the plan. Yukon asked Rodrum for permission to train the slaves, justifying it by describing an elite workforce of disciplined slaves who could perform the work of 3 people. Shadow of laziness with such slaves, the construction of the fortress could be completed in a week. Rodrum understood Yukon's reasoning, but was about to refuse, as the men were physically weak for work and training. However, Yukon said the commander would immediately praise Rodrum, saying, "Well done, Ryoden." Thus, Rodrum allowed Yukon to train the slaves, for which the young man thanked him. In the cell, Rachel was depressed, convinced that her hero had gone mad. First, he humbled himself before the Demon King's army, and now he was even training slaves. She couldn't understand how she could live while feeling so hopeless and despondent. The KH felt the girl was too noisy and once again said he had a plan. However, Rachel thought Yukon was trying to deceive her again. Yukon asked if she really thought he was foolish. He explained he planned to use the slaves to start a rebellion, but the girl didn't seem to understand what kind of rebellion he was referring to. Yukon clarified that there were 3,000 human slaves in the fortress, while the Demon King's army had only about 500 soldiers. Additionally, there was a human alliance base not far from the fortress, which was why they were rushing construction because of these humans. Smiling, Yukon continued explaining to the girl that during the chaos of the rebellion, they would call for support from the human alliance. At that moment, the girl began to glow with joy and admiration, for until then, she had thought her hero was a dumb man who only thought about muscles and fights. In any case, Yukon only needed to check the mission reward. Rachel was shocked. He had actually earned hero points. The entire mission story wasn't a lie. Yukon was tired of explaining it was true. Furthermore, there was now something called the Hero Store. At this point, Yukon decided to open the Hero Store, hoping to get something good. Determined, he opened the store using his bonus points and exclaimed happily that he had finally acquired a hero skill. But his expectations were clearly interrupted by something unexpected. Messages appeared with options like hold your breath and something absurd like hold your best, leaving the dog stunned, clearly not expecting such abilities. Rachel explained that the other abilities were cooking, cleaning, and laundry, and wondered if these skills were really necessary for a hero. She justified that this was only the first level of the shop, and added that if more points were collected and the level increased, something truly useful could be found. The dog was furious, calling Rachel a diaper wearer. They saluted, and the army chief announced that they would sing the song of the Third Corps. It began, and the soldiers sang, praising the Demon King's army, inspiring them to fight against the humans. They claimed that nothing was more important than the Demon King's affection. Rodrum observed contentedly, happy to let Yuk train the army. The door suddenly burst open, creating a tense atmosphere as Jar the Goblin rushed in with an important message. He shouted that he had an urgent report. A human army was approaching their direction. He added that the 8th Division, which was fighting them, had already been surrounded and retreated. Rod, looking at the map, realized that the 8th Division was the largest unit in the region, and if it was defeated, the enemies would soon be there. Ron was worried, as they would have to leave the fortress when it was almost complete. Jaren insisted on evacuation, but Rodrom stopped him, saying to wait. Rodrom looked at the army gathered outside and reflected that since ancient times, war had always been a battle for resources. He added that the fundamental rule of war is never to lose a good supply officer. Finally, Rodon told Jar to go, affirming that he would take care of Yukon and follow shortly after. At the training ground, he addressed the soldiers, demanding that they continue training. However, he noticed a strange sound and suspected that today's training would be cancelled again. From Hotron's observations, Yuk realized that his skills had increased a little, but not enough to begin Grace's CP. He understood that he was not ready for his plans yet and sighed, wishing for something unexpected to help improve his skills. At that moment, Hran suddenly jumped from a height, grabbed Yukon, and called him by his full name, surprising him. Yukon, startled, called him Sir Hran. Hran, with a serious expression, said there was no time and ordered Yukon to go with him immediately. Yukon was confused and asked where they were going and why. Suddenly, in another part of the fortress, a battle erupted, and the human commander called his army to attack, declaring that victory was near. The humans advanced while the goblins tried to contain the onslaught, clearly losing control of the situation. One of the soldiers spotted Rodrom and shouted that he was the Red Nightmare. The commander ordered the common soldiers to retreat, leaving the fight to the knights, claiming that victory was near. Cam was surprised to see human troops there and thought that perhaps this was his chance, an opportunity to stab the Demon King's commander in the back and return to human society. A knight attacked him, pointing his spear at Hran and shouting, "Die, Red Nightmare!" He charged with great speed and determination, but Hodon intercepted the spear effortlessly, holding it so tightly that it broke and easily stopping the attack. Yukon watched, shocked by Ryun's power, his eyes widening in surprise at witnessing such strength. Hran activates his technique, the 7th movement of Hodon martial arts, and a complex pattern of bones and flaming lines appears, intensifying his attack. With a powerful spin kick, Rodon delivers a devastating blow, crushing the knight and shattering his armor. He then unleashes a technique called Wave of Destruction, a massive explosion of power that obliterates everything around, leaving destruction and dust in its wake. Rodon turns to Yukon and asks if he is all right, his figure standing out against the fiery explosion in the background. Yukon nervously replies that it's time to leave, clearly not wanting to linger during this tense moment. The tower where the battle took place lies in ruins, the sound of the wind echoing through what feels like a now deserted fortress. A group of refugees gathers on the battlefield as soldiers separate the people, directing the citizens of the Kingdom of Marriott one way and the citizens of the Empire of Drazen another. Dramatic events unfold as a warrior in armor questions the captives about whether they are warriors. One man hesitantly confirms, and the warrior invites them to follow, promising better treatment for warriors than for regular captives. The captives agree, hopeful for improved conditions. A man named Alan Grimmer emerges, introducing himself as a Duke of the Empire of Dren and commander of Allied forces. A soldier informs him that the citizens' evacuation has been completed, adding that those who declared themselves warriors have been mobilized. Alan gives the order to commence the operation, a command broadcasted to all gathered troops. It is then announced that their task is to eliminate all warriors ahead. A horse-drawn carriage moves through the forest. Inside one of the enclosed carriages, Yukon sits with a somber expression, saying goodbye to the other world and his second life as he realizes his adventure is coming to an end. Yukon understands that all pursuers have been killed and that the chase is over. The fairy Rachel tries to convince Yukon that this crisis is an opportunity, offering to head to the Demon Army's headquarters to assess the situation. However, Yukon, visibly irritated, calls her a liar. Radron suddenly awakens, apologizing for dozing off, and asks if Yukon said anything. Yukon quickly denies it, mumbling that he was only grumbling about the honor of accompanying Rodon. Rodon responds that he is glad to hear this, and informs Yukon that they are almost at the headquarters of the 3rd Corps, suggesting Yukon prepare himself. Yukon discovers that he will officially be enlisted in the Demon King's army, leaving him shocked. Soon, their arrival is sighted at the fortress wall, accompanied by cries of Rodon's return and orders to open the gates. The carriage, escorted by guards, enters the city. Hran says they will go directly to the commander. As they walk through the streets, Yukon enthusiastically remarks that it is an honor to meet the commander so quickly. Hran agrees, but warns Yukon to behave properly in front of the commander, or he will die. This clearly frightens Yukon, who mentally tries to convince himself that staying calm will help him face even the most dangerous situations. Finally, they reach a large door. Hran announces their return to the commander, who calls them inside. Hearing a woman's voice, Yukon begins to suspect the commander might be a woman. Inside, they are greeted by a mysterious woman seated on a throne, her imposing aura leaving them clearly impressed. She asks who brought Yukon and turns to Ryun, welcoming him back. We learn that this woman is Remus, the commander of the Demon King's army's 3rd Corps. Yukon is stunned by her beauty. Remus acknowledges his admiration with a smile, leaving Yukon unsure how to respond, pondering whether he should also compliment her. Hran feels guilty for failing to defend the fortress, but Remus reassures him, explaining the blame lies with the commander of the 8th Division. Smiling, she adds that she should have made a purse out of that commander's skin long ago. Yukon feels the immense pressure and power emanating from Remus, and realizes she is not pleased that he survived and returned. Struggling to breathe in her presence, Yukon hears Remus sarcastically remark that he returned as a loser. Her aura and words surpass everything he has experienced before. She shifts her focus to Rodon, asking about the person he brought. Rodon introduces Yukon, stating that he has already spoken about him and brought him to officially enlist in the demon army. Remus smiles, calling Yukon cute, and asking if she should expect something special from someone chosen by Rodon. Overwhelmed by fear and a will to survive, Yukon promises to do his best. Remus observes that with Yukon's body, he won't last long in the demon army. She turns to Hran to confirm, and he agrees, adding that the others would simply devour him. Yukon is shocked by this news. Hran attempts to defend his new companion, reminding them that human participation in the demon army is not unprecedented. He offers to train Yukon personally if Remus permits, but she immediately rejects the offer, saying no time should be wasted on a human. Releasing powerful magical energy, a strange creature appears in her hands, and she interacts with it. Yukon panics, not understanding what is happening. Remus decides that Yukon will now be responsible for taking care of her pet, a demonic creature resembling a dog with a bell around its neck, named Bobo. Yukon is surprised to hear it called a pet and questions its cuteness, suspecting the dog is straight from hell. He senses a powerful aura emanating from Bobo, despite it still being a child. Hran also notices this power and confirms it. Remus asks why Yukon is reacting so strangely, implying that perhaps he doesn't like the situation. Yukon proudly declares that he is a candidate for the demon army and honored to care for Bobo despite being human. Remus approves of his enthusiasm, and Bobo immediately strikes Yukon with its paw. Remus explains that Bobo is growing and needs to be fed, otherwise he will become aggressive. She adds that finding a new caretaker is difficult since Bobo has devoured all the previous ones. Yukon nervously agrees to the task, pledging to fulfill his duty. Later, he finds himself in front of a door labeled Bobo's house. Perplexed, Rachel runs to him, informing him about a new heroic mission right in the middle of the demon army. Yukon tries to calm her to avoid waking Bobo, realizing this mission is meant to win Bobo's affection and earn 200 hero points. Astonished by this task, he struggles to understand how it relates to being a hero. He is surprised by this mission and doesn't quite understand what it has to do with being a hero. Then a goblin appears, shouting, "Human," to get Yukon's attention. Yukon introduces himself, but internally realizes he is clearly being used as bait by the goblin. He asks where the other elders are, to which the goblin calmly replies that they are gone. They're all dead. The goblin explains to Yukon that his mission will be to prepare food for Bobo. Yukon is surprised by the simplicity of the task and agrees. However, Bobo soon wakes up and attacks the goblin. The goblin panics, trying to explain that he brought a fresh human especially for Bobo. Furious, Yukon questions what the goblin is doing, and the goblin tells him to shut up. The goblin recognizes that one of them will die anyway and prepares for a desperate fight. Yukon, unwilling to give up, declares that it is the goblin, not him, who will die. Bobo, seeing the snack in front of him, becomes euphoric and prepares to devour him. Yan and Rachel notice that the pet clearly liked their offering. Rachel runs frantically from Bobo, screaming that it's too much. Yan, observing the situation coldly, reminds her not to run too far, or Bobo will get hungry again. He finds a large bone in his inventory, an item that can attract dog-like monsters. Using his cunning, Yukon decides to use the item. He calls Bobo, shows him the bone, and asks if he wants it, then throws it. Bobo immediately runs after it. Exhausted, Rachel asks how Yukon found such an object and expresses regret that he didn't use it earlier. Smiling, Yukon responds that it's thanks to his brilliant brain that never misses the small details, convincing himself that the mission would now be easy. While at the demon castle, Yukon realizes that taking care of Bobo isn't so simple. Bobo, clearly dissatisfied with the bone, gets irritated, and his anger becomes immediately visible. Yukon panics, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. Rachel suggests taking Bobo outside, hoping it will calm him. Yukon thinks frantically, trying to recall something that might help him deal with the enraged creature. A magic word comes to his mind, walk, and he decides to try it. To his surprise, Bobo actually calms down, looking at him with an innocent expression. Afterward, Bobo suddenly runs toward Yukon, as if showing affection, and Yukon ends up hugging Bobo in what appears both funny and touching from the outside. Yukon tries to guide Bobo, but the situation quickly spirals out of control. He keeps trying to calm Bobo, shouting walk, snack, and other words. They struggle to find the kitchen, so Rachel decides to ask a passing goblin for directions. Yukon calls out to the goblin for help finding the way. The goblin is startled to see a human and is about to say something when Bobo growls furiously, his eyes glowing red. The goblin, frightened, hears Yukon say it's Bobo's turn for a walk. The goblin worries about what the man is doing with Bobo, but just then, the monster tries to bite him. Yukon tries to hold Bobo and calm him down, explaining to the goblin that he is now responsible for Bobo. He asks if the goblin knows where the kitchen is. The goblin, slightly confused, points left, and Yukon, along with his fairy companion, moves on, laughing at the goblin's fear and questioning if he really belongs to the demon army. Eventually, the hero decides they need to find meat in the kitchen to feed Bobo and deal with his hunger. The fairy teases him, saying he won't care for Bobo forever, to which he reacts with perplexity, not realizing what she means. The hero starts sharing his dream of a fateful meeting with a blonde woman and his desire to marry her. His thoughts on this turn into a deep reflection as he repeats the word marry with a touch of uncertainty and confusion. Finally, Yukon notices Bobo is missing and shouts like crazy to find his little dog. Panicking, he realizes that just looking away for a second, the pet disappears immediately.